The crimson sands of Xerion Prime stretched endlessly under twin suns, their harsh light creating a landscape that could kill the unprepared within hours. Captain Marcus Chen adjusted his environmental suit's cooling system as he approached the coordinates his ship's sensors had detected. What he found there defied all logic and military protocol. A small figure lay crumpled beside the wreckage of what appeared to be an escape pod, her fox-like ears twitching weakly in the scorching wind. Princess Lyra, of the Vulpine Consortium, had been missing for 3 standard days, and according to every intelligence report Marcus had read, she should have been dead within the first 6 hours on this hellish planet. The Vulpine were known throughout the galaxy as a proud, elegant species with their distinctive fox-like features and incredible technological prowess. Their ships could travel faster than any human vessel. Their weapons could slice through asteroid fields, and their diplomatic corps had negotiated peace treaties that had lasted centuries. But they were also notoriously fragile, requiring specific atmospheric conditions and temperature ranges to survive. Marcus knelt beside the unconscious princess, noting how her usually pristine silver fur was matted with dust, and her elaborate royal garments were torn and stained. Her breathing was shallow, and her body temperature was dangerously low despite the planet's heat. The human medic training he'd received during his years in the Terran Space Force kicked in immediately. "This is impossible," he muttered to himself, checking her vital signs with his suit's medical scanner. She should have been dead hours ago. The scanner revealed something that made Marcus pause. The princess wasn't just surviving against all odds. She was fighting with a determination that reminded him of the human colonists he'd seen endure impossible conditions on frontier worlds. There was something different about this particular Vulpine, something that set her apart from the pampered nobility he'd encountered in diplomatic meetings. As Marcus carefully lifted her into his arms, preparing to carry her back to his ship, Princess Lyra's amber eyes fluttered open. For a moment she seemed confused, staring up at the human who had found her in this desolate place. Then awareness flooded back, and with it came a mixture of gratitude and something else. Something that looked almost like shame. "You came for me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind that carried razor-sharp sand particles across the wasteland. "That's what we do," Marcus replied simply, though he knew his mission had been classified as a recovery operation, not a rescue. The Terran High Command had expected to find a body, not a survivor. The journey back to his ship should have been straightforward. Marcus had landed his scout vessel less than 2 kilometers away, following standard protocol for dangerous planetary surfaces. But as they began moving across the hostile terrain, it became clear that Xerion Prime had other plans for them. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble, and Marcus felt his environmental suit's proximity alarms screaming warnings. Seismic activity was common on this world, but what emerged from the sand was far worse than any earthquake. Massive crystalline formations erupted around them, each one pulsing with an energy that interfered with electronic equipment. "The void crystals," Princess Lyra gasped, recognizing the formations immediately. "My pod crashed because of them. They disrupt all technology within a 50-kilometer radius." Marcus felt his suit's systems beginning to fail one by one. First the cooling unit, then the navigation system, and finally the communication array. They were now completely cut off from his ship, stranded in a landscape that grew more hostile with each passing moment. The princess tried to walk on her own, but her legs gave out after only a few steps. The ordeal she'd endured had left her weaker than she wanted to admit, and her species' natural limitations were beginning to show. Marcus caught her before she fell, noting how light she was compared to a human of similar size. "I can't do this," she said, tears forming in her amber eyes. "I'm not strong enough. My people, they'll say I brought shame to the royal bloodline by surviving when I should have died with honor." Marcus looked down at her, seeing not the pampered princess that galactic media portrayed, but someone who had fought against impossible odds for 3 days straight. "Your people are wrong," he said firmly. "Survival isn't shameful. It's the most human thing there is." The irony of his words wasn't lost on either of them. Here was a human telling a Vulpine what it meant to be human, and somehow it made perfect sense. As the void crystals continued to grow around them, creating a maze of energy-disrupting formations, Marcus made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He lifted Princess Lyra into his arms, securing her against his chest in a way that would allow him to carry her while keeping both hands free for climbing and balance. "What are you doing?" she asked, though she made no move to resist. "Something my species learned a long time ago," Marcus replied, beginning to navigate through the crystal maze. "When the technology fails, when the odds are impossible, when everyone else says it can't be done, humans find a way. We adapt, we endure, and we never leave anyone behind." The journey that followed tested every limit of human endurance. The twin suns beat down mercilessly as Marcus climbed over crystal formations that rose like glittering mountains from the sand. His suit's cooling system had failed completely, leaving him to rely on his body's natural ability to regulate temperature. Sweat poured down his face inside his helmet, but he kept moving. Princess Lyra watched in amazement as this human did what her own people would have considered impossible. The Vulpine were technologically superior in every measurable way, but they had never developed the raw physical and mental toughness that seemed to define humanity. Where her people would use anti-gravity platforms and environmental suits with multiple backup systems, this human was carrying her using nothing but his own strength and determination. Hours passed as they moved through the crystalline wasteland. Marcus's legs burned with exhaustion, his back ached from carrying the additional weight, and his throat was parched despite his suit's water recycling system. But he never stopped, never complained, and never showed any sign of giving up. "Why are you doing this?" Princess Lyra asked during one of their brief rest stops. "Your mission was to recover my body, not risk your life to save me." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the alien landscape that seemed determined to kill them both. "Because that's not who we are," he finally answered. "Humans don't abandon people. We don't calculate the odds and decide someone isn't worth saving. We see someone in trouble and we help. It's that simple." It wasn't simple, of course. Nothing about their situation was simple. They were trapped on a world that could kill them in dozens of different ways. Their technology was useless, and they had no way to contact the outside galaxy. But somehow, Marcus made it seem like the most natural thing in the world. As night fell on Xerion Prime, the temperature plummeted from deadly heat to bone-chilling cold. Marcus found a small shelter formed by 2 leaning crystal formations and carefully set the princess down. His environmental suit was maintaining basic life support, but without the heating elements, they would both freeze before morning. That's when Princess Lyra did something that surprised them both. Despite her exhaustion and the cultural taboos of her people, she moved closer to Marcus, pressing her small body against his larger frame. "Body heat," she explained quietly. "It's a survival technique I read about in human exploration journals." Marcus wrapped his arms around her, feeling how she shivered against him. Her fur was soft beneath his gloved hands, and he could sense the trust it took for her to allow this contact. Vulpines were known to be extremely particular about physical proximity, especially with other species. "Tell me about your people," Marcus said, trying to distract them both from their dire situation. "The real story, not the diplomatic propaganda." Princess Lyra was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she had fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a sadness that seemed to echo across the crystalline cavern they sheltered in. "We're dying," she admitted. Not individually, but as a people. We've become so focused on perfection, on maintaining our technological superiority and cultural purity, that we've forgotten how to adapt, how to survive when things go wrong. That's why I was out here in the first place. She went on to explain that she had been secretly studying human exploration techniques, trying to understand how a species that was considered primitive by galactic standards had managed to spread across more worlds than any other civilization. Her escape pod had been carrying research data on human survival methods when it crashed on Zerion Prime. My father, the Emperor, he forbade this research, she continued. He said it was beneath our dignity to learn from inferior species. But I've seen the reports from the frontier worlds. When disaster strikes, when colonies are cut off from supply lines, when everything goes wrong, it's always the humans who find a way to survive. Marcus tightened his arms around her as another wave of frigid wind swept through their shelter. Maybe that's because we've had to, he said. Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day. We learned to adapt because we had no choice. And now you're teaching me, Princess Lyra whispered, her breath warm against his chest, showing me what real strength looks like. As the long night wore on, Marcus found himself sharing stories of human exploration and survival. He told her about the first Mars colonists who had survived equipment failures by building tools from scrap metal, about the deep space survey teams who had walked across entire continents of hostile alien worlds when their vehicles broke down, about the rescue workers who had carried injured comrades through hundreds of kilometers of dangerous terrain simply because it was the right thing to do. With each story, Princess Lyra began to understand something that her people had lost somewhere in their rise to galactic prominence. They had forgotten that true strength didn't come from superior technology or cultural refinement. It came from the willingness to endure, to adapt, and to never give up on each other. When dawn finally broke over Zerion Prime, Marcus and Princess Lyra emerged from their shelter to find that the void crystals had continued growing throughout the night. What had been a difficult maze was now an almost impassable labyrinth of energy-disrupting formations that stretched to the horizon. But Marcus simply adjusted his grip on the princess, checked his suit's remaining power levels, and began walking again. Because that's what humans did. They found a way forward, no matter how impossible the path seemed. As they disappeared into the crystal maze, both of them changed by their night together. Neither could know that their journey was only beginning. The real test of their bond, and of everything Marcus had taught her about human determination, still lay ahead. The crystal labyrinth had grown throughout the second day, transforming the already treacherous landscape into something that defied all logic. Marcus navigated through passages that seemed to shift and change when they weren't looking directly at them, while Princess Lyra used her species' natural ability to sense electromagnetic patterns to guide them away from the most dangerous formations. There, she pointed to a gap between two massive crystals that pulsed with a softer blue light. That way leads toward lower energy readings. Your ship might have some functionality in that direction. Marcus had been carrying her for nearly 18 hours straight, stopping only for brief rests when his body absolutely demanded it. His environmental suit was running on backup power, its systems failing one by one as the void crystal's interference grew stronger. Yet he showed no signs of slowing down, his steady pace eating up the kilometers with mechanical precision. Princess Lyra found herself studying this human with growing fascination. Everything she had been taught about their species suggested they should be inferior in every way. They lacked the Vulpine's advanced technology, their refined culture, their natural elegance. But watching Marcus push through exhaustion and environmental hazards that would have killed any member of her species, she began to understand why human colonies were spreading across the galaxy, while other civilizations struggled to maintain their existing territories. "Your people must think I'm weak," she said, as they paused near a formation that provided some shade from the twin suns. "Needing to be carried like this." Marcus set her down gently and began checking his suit's systems. "My people would think you're incredibly strong," he replied, without looking up from his diagnostics. "You survived 3 days alone in conditions that should have killed you in hours. That's not weakness, princess. That's the opposite. But I can't walk. I can't contribute to our survival. I'm just dead weight." This time Marcus did look at her, his dark eyes serious behind his helmet's visor. "You've been guiding us through this maze for hours. You saved us from walking into at least 3 energy fields that would have fried my suit completely. You found water condensation in that crystal formation this morning when my sensors couldn't detect any moisture at all. How exactly is that dead weight?" Princess Lyra fell silent, considering his words. In Vulpine society, physical strength was often dismissed as crude and unnecessary, but being carried by someone else was seen as a profound weakness. Yet Marcus spoke as if her intellectual contributions were equally valuable to their survival. It was a perspective she had never encountered before. As they continued through the crystal maze, their conversation turned to more personal topics. Marcus told her about growing up on a frontier world where equipment failures were a daily occurrence, where humans learned to fix things with improvised tools and sheer determination. Princess Lyra shared stories of her sheltered life in the Imperial Palace, where every need was anticipated by sophisticated AI systems and where failure of any kind was seen as unacceptable. "I've never been hungry," she admitted as they shared the last of Marcus's emergency rations. "Never been truly cold or hot or uncomfortable. Until this week, I thought survival was something that happened to other people." "And now?" Marcus asked. "Now I understand why my research scared my father so much," she replied. "If our people learned what humans know about adaptation and endurance, it would change everything about who we are." The afternoon brought new challenges as they discovered that the crystal formations were not entirely natural. Deep within the maze, they found structures that were clearly artificial, built by some long-dead civilization that had once called Zerion Prime home. The architecture was unlike anything either of their species had encountered, consisting of flowing organic shapes that seemed to grow from the crystalline matrix itself. "These ruins predate both our civilizations," Princess Lyra observed, running her gloved hands over symbols carved into what might have been a doorway. "According to the dating methods my people use, this structure is at least 50,000 years old." Marcus studied the carvings with growing unease. His military training had included xenoarchaeology, and something about these symbols seemed familiar. "I've seen markings like these before," he said slowly. "In the restricted files about the Void Wars." The Void Wars were a taboo subject in galactic politics, a conflict that had occurred millennia ago and left entire star systems uninhabitable. Most official records had been sealed or destroyed, but rumors persisted of an ancient enemy that had nearly destroyed all sentient life in the galaxy before mysteriously disappearing. As they explored the ruins, they discovered that the structures extended far deeper into the planet's crust than should have been possible. Passages led downward into darkness that their lights couldn't penetrate, and from those depths came a sound that made both of them deeply uncomfortable. It was a rhythmic humming, like machinery running on automatic systems that had been operating for thousands of years. "We should go back," Princess Lyra whispered, her fox-like ears flattening against her head in instinctive fear. "There's something down there that my people's genetic memory warns against." But as they turned to leave, they discovered that the crystal maze had shifted again during their exploration. The passage they had used to enter the ruins was now sealed by a solid wall of crystal, and their only way forward led deeper into the ancient complex. Marcus checked his suit's power levels and found that they had less than 6 hours of life support remaining. The interference from the crystals was draining his systems faster than anticipated, and there was no way they could survive another night in the open without shelter and heat. "Down we go," he said grimly, lifting Princess Lyra back into his arms. "Sometimes the only way out is through." The descent into the ruins revealed wonders and horrors in equal measure. The ancient builders had created chambers filled with technology that still functioned after millennia of abandonment. Holographic displays showed star charts of the galaxy as it had existed 50,000 years ago, with civilizations marked in colors that represented different threat levels. Princess Lyra gasped as she recognized the pattern. "This is a war room," she breathed. "They were fighting something that came from outside our galaxy entirely." The displays showed the progression of that ancient war, wave after wave of attacks from entities that seemed to exist partially outside normal space-time. The defending civilizations had been forced to make increasingly desperate choices, ultimately resorting to weapons that transformed entire worlds into crystalline wastelands like Xerion Prime. They weaponized the crystals, Marcus realized, understanding flooding through him. The void crystals aren't natural. They're a defensive system that's still active after all this time. As if responding to his words, the ancient machinery around them began to hum more loudly. New displays flickered to life, showing current star charts that included both human and Vulpine space. Warning symbols appeared over numerous systems, indicating the return of the same external threat that had nearly destroyed the galaxy millennia ago. "It's starting again," Princess Lyra whispered, her scientific training allowing her to interpret the data streams flowing across the displays. "The enemy is coming back, and our civilizations are completely unprepared." The revelation hit them both simultaneously. Princess Lyra's research into human survival techniques hadn't been academic curiosity. It had been unconscious preparation for a war that her genetic memory had sensed approaching. And Marcus's mission to recover her hadn't been routine diplomatic duty. It had been the first step in an alliance that would be necessary for galactic survival. The ancient machines continued to activate around them, systems that had been waiting for someone to discover them and understand their warning. But understanding the threat was only the beginning. They still had to survive long enough to warn their respective peoples, and the crystalline defenses that surrounded them were designed to prevent exactly that kind of communication with the outside galaxy. Marcus studied the technical readouts that Princess Lyra was translating, his military mind already working on tactical problems. "How long do we have?" he asked. "According to this data, the first wave of attacks will begin within 1 standard year," she replied. "But the advanced scouts are already here. That's what triggered the defensive systems on this planet." The pieces fell into place with terrible clarity. Princess Lyra's escape pod hadn't crashed due to mechanical failure. It had been shot down by an enemy scout that was already operating in this system. The princess hadn't been abandoned by her people. She had been fleeing from a threat that they couldn't yet see. "We have to get off this planet," Marcus said. But even as he spoke, they both knew how impossible that task had become. His ship was kilometers away through a maze of crystal formations, and even if they reached it, the void crystal's interference would prevent any communication with the outside galaxy. That's when Princess Lyra made a decision that surprised them both. Despite her exhaustion and her species' natural limitations, she stood up on unsteady legs and walked to one of the ancient control panels. "I can't fight," she said, her hands moving over controls that responded to her touch as if they recognized her genetic signature. "I can't carry you the way you carried me. But I can understand these systems." The ancient machines responded to her manipulation, and suddenly the chamber was filled with holographic displays showing the internal structure of the entire planet. Princess Lyra studied the data with the fierce concentration of someone who had spent years learning to think beyond the limitations of her upbringing. "There," she said, pointing to a section of the display that showed a massive chamber deep beneath the planet's surface. "The central control room. If we can reach it, I might be able to disable the crystal interference long enough for you to contact your ship." Marcus looked at the route she was indicating and felt his heart sink. It was 20 kilometers through underground passages filled with active defense systems, down shafts that dropped hundreds of meters into the planet's core. Even with his military training and enhanced human endurance, it would be the most dangerous journey he had ever attempted. But as he looked at Princess Lyra, standing unsteadily but determined beside the alien control panel, he realized that she had changed during their time together. The sheltered royal who had needed to be carried was gone, replaced by someone who was ready to face impossible odds with the same determination that had kept her alive for 3 days in the wasteland. "You can't walk that far," he said gently. "Then you'll have to carry me," she replied, meeting his eyes with a gaze that held no shame or apology. "But this time we go as partners. I'll guide us through the defenses, and you'll get us there physically. Human endurance and Vulpine intelligence, working together." Marcus felt something shift in his understanding of their relationship. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. It was the beginning of an alliance that might be the key to galactic survival. He lifted Princess Lyra into his arms again, but this time it felt different. She wasn't a burden to be carried, she was a teammate with complementary skills. As they began their descent into the planet's depths, following passages that had been designed by minds utterly alien to both their species, neither of them could know that their partnership was being watched. Deep in the void between galaxies, entities that existed partially outside normal space-time had detected the activation of the ancient warning systems. The enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 50,000 years ago was indeed returning, and they had not forgotten the worlds that had resisted them before. Zerion Prime was scheduled to be cleansed as soon as the advanced scouts confirmed that the defensive systems were truly abandoned. But those scouts had not counted on the stubborn determination of a human who refused to abandon anyone, or the brilliant adaptability of a Vulpine princess who had learned to see strength in unexpected places. As Marcus and Princess Lyra disappeared into the ancient depths, their unlikely partnership was about to become something far more significant than either of them could imagine. The descent through the ancient installation tested every lesson that Marcus and Princess Lyra had learned about human determination and Vulpine intelligence. The passages were filled with security systems that activated as they approached, forcing them to navigate through energy barriers, gravitational anomalies, and automated guardians that had been waiting 50,000 years for intruders. Princess Lyra had become Marcus's tactical commander, her understanding of the alien technology growing stronger with each system they encountered. She could read the energy patterns and predict where defenses would activate, guiding Marcus through safe paths that seemed impossible to navigate. But the mental strain was enormous, and Marcus could see her growing weaker with each kilometer they traveled. "The central chamber is just ahead," she whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "But there's something else. The readings show active life signs down there. We're not alone." Marcus felt his blood chill as he understood the implication. If there were active life signs in a chamber that had been sealed for millennia, they could only belong to the enemy scouts that had shot down Princess Lyra's escape pod. The very entities that the ancient defensive systems had been designed to contain were already inside the planet's most protected area. They approached the final entrance carefully, Marcus's military training taking over as he assessed the tactical situation. The chamber beyond was massive, filled with crystalline formations that pulsed with energy patterns unlike anything they had seen before. At the center of the room stood 3 figures that hurt to look at directly, their forms seeming to exist partially outside normal space. The Void Scouts had been waiting for them. "Fascinating," one of the entities spoke directly into their minds, its voice carrying harmonics that made both humans and Vulpines feel instinctively terrified. A human and a Vulpine, working together despite their obvious incompatibilities. How remarkably primitive. Marcus set Princess Lyra down gently, positioning himself between her and the entities. His hand moved to the energy weapon on his belt, though he knew it would be useless against beings that existed partially outside normal reality. "You are here to reactivate the warning systems," another scout observed, its attention focused on Princess Lyra. "Your species created quite an elaborate defense network the last time we visited this galaxy. It took us considerable effort to neutralize your predecessors." Princess Lyra struggled to her feet, using the wall for support. Despite her fear, her scientific curiosity was stronger. "You're the ones who destroyed the crystal builders," she said. "But you didn't destroy the defenses completely." "They've been waiting for someone to find them." The third entity made a sound that might have been laughter. "Indeed, we allowed certain systems to remain active as a test. We wanted to see if any species in this galaxy had evolved beyond the primitive cooperation that nearly defeated us before. You have provided excellent data." Marcus felt understanding dawn with horrible clarity. This had all been orchestrated. The princess's research into human survival techniques, her escape pod being shot down over this specific planet, even his own mission to recover her. The enemy scouts had been manipulating events to bring together representatives of the two most prominent species in the galaxy. "You wanted to see if we could work together," he realized aloud. "Correct," the first entity confirmed. "Your species has spread across more worlds than any previous civilization, demonstrating remarkable adaptability. The Vulpine species has achieved technological advancement beyond what we previously encountered. Separately, you might pose some resistance to our return. Together, you could potentially recreate the alliance network that once opposed us." Princess Lyra's amber eyes widened as she grasped the full scope of the threat. "So you're going to kill us before we can warn anyone?" "Eventually," the second entity replied with casual indifference. "But first, you will demonstrate the limits of this primitive cooperation you seem to value so highly." The chamber around them began to change, crystalline formations rising from the floor to create a complex maze of passages and obstacles. The temperature dropped rapidly, and Marcus felt his environmental suit struggling to maintain life support in conditions that were becoming increasingly hostile. "A simple test," the third entity explained as energy barriers flickered to life throughout the maze. "The human will attempt to carry the Vulpine to the central control station and activate the warning systems. We will observe how long your cooperation lasts under stress." Marcus looked at the maze they had created and felt despair wash over him. The obstacles were specifically designed to be impossible for a human carrying additional weight. Gaps too narrow to pass through while carrying someone, walls too high to climb with a passenger, energy barriers that would kill anyone not wearing a full environmental suit. But as he turned to explain the hopeless situation to Princess Lyra, he saw something in her amber eyes that reminded him of the determination that had kept her alive in the wasteland for 3 days. She wasn't looking at the maze with despair. She was studying it with the analytical mind that had guided them through the ancient defenses. "They made a mistake," she whispered, too quietly for the entities to hear. "They designed this based on what they observed, but they don't truly understand what makes human cooperation work." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, Princess Lyra was moving. Despite her exhaustion and her species' physical limitations, she began climbing one of the crystalline formations with surprising agility. Her fox-like reflexes and natural grace allowed her to navigate handholds that would have been impossible for Marcus to use while carrying her. "What are you doing?" he called after her. "Something my people would never expect," she replied, reaching a ledge about 3 meters above the floor. "I'm not going to be carried anymore. We're going to do this together, as equals." The entities watched with apparent interest as Princess Lyra began making her way across the maze independently. She couldn't move as quickly as Marcus, and she had to rest frequently, but she was moving under her own power. Meanwhile, Marcus used his strength and endurance to clear obstacles from her path, breaking through energy barriers and creating handholds in the crystalline walls. "Interesting," the first entity observed. "The Vulpine is attempting to match human physical capabilities despite obvious biological limitations." But they were wrong about what was happening. Princess Lyra wasn't trying to become human. She was learning to apply human principles of adaptation and determination while remaining fundamentally Vulpine. When she encountered an obstacle that required physical strength, she found ways to use leverage and technique instead of raw power. When Marcus faced a challenge that required understanding the ancient technology, he followed her guidance without question. The maze that should have taken hours to navigate was conquered in under 30 minutes. Not because either of them had transcended their species' limitations, but because they had learned to complement each other perfectly. Where one was weak, the other was strong. Where one was confused, the other provided clarity. The entity's casual interest began to shift toward something that might have been concern. "This level of cooperation was not anticipated," the second entity admitted. "Previous species required decades of diplomacy to achieve such coordination." Marcus and Princess Lyra reached the central control station together, both exhausted, but neither defeated. The control systems responded to the princess's touch, ancient holographic displays flickering to life as she began accessing the warning networks that had been dormant for millennia. "I can activate the deep space communicators," she told Marcus, "but the signal will take time to reach both our governments. We need to buy at least an hour for the message to transmit." The entities had apparently heard enough. Energy began building around them as they prepared to end their experiment with lethal force. But Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between the aliens and the control station where Princess Lyra worked. "You want to know about human cooperation?" he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived. "Then watch this." What happened next defied everything the entities thought they understood about primitive species. Marcus didn't try to fight them directly, because he knew that would be hopeless. Instead, he began talking to them. Not pleading or bargaining, but sharing the stories he had told Princess Lyra during their first night together in the Crystal Maze. He told them about the Mars colonists who had rebuilt their settlement 3 times after equipment failures. About the deep space explorers who had walked across hostile worlds because they refused to abandon their teammates. About the rescue workers who had carried injured people through hundreds of kilometers of dangerous terrain simply because it was the right thing to do. "You think cooperation is about achieving tactical advantages," Marcus said as energy continued to build around the entities. "But you're wrong. Human cooperation isn't a strategy. It's who we are. We don't work together because it's useful. We work together because we can't imagine doing anything else." The entities paused, their attention focused on Marcus with something approaching fascination. "You would die for a member of a species that is genetically incompatible with your own," the first entity observed. "Without hesitation," Marcus replied. "And she would do the same for you?" Marcus looked back at Princess Lyra, who had stopped working at the control station to listen to their exchange. Her amber eyes met his, and in them he saw not just gratitude or respect, but something deeper. A bond that had been forged in impossible circumstances and tested by challenges that should have destroyed them both. "Ask her yourself," he said. Princess Lyra stood slowly, leaving the control station where warning signals were already beginning to transmit across the galaxy. She walked to Marcus's side, her small hand finding his gloved one. "My people believe that survival is about maintaining superiority over others," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the massive chamber. "But this human taught me that true survival is about lifting others up, even when it costs you everything. Especially when it costs you everything." The energy building around the entities flickered and died. For the first time since the encounter began, they seemed genuinely uncertain. "This response was not predicted by our analysis models," the second entity admitted. "That's because your models are incomplete," Princess Lyra said with growing confidence. "You're trying to understand cooperation as if it were a survival strategy, but it's not. It's an expression of values that transcend individual survival." The third entity moved closer, studying them both with attention that felt like being examined under a microscope. "You would sacrifice your individual survival chances for abstract principles?" "Every day," Marcus replied simply. What happened next would be debated by xenobiologists for generations to come. The Void Scouts, entities that had destroyed countless civilizations across multiple galaxies, did something unprecedented. They withdrew. "This galaxy has evolved beyond our previous parameters," the first entity announced, its form beginning to fade as it prepared to depart. "The cooperation demonstrated here suggests that direct conquest may not be feasible with current resources." "We will return," the second entity added, "but not in the manner originally planned. This requires new strategies." "You have gained a reprieve," the third entity concluded. "Use it wisely." And then they were gone, vanishing into the void between dimensions as if they had never existed. Marcus and Princess Lyra stood alone in the ancient control chamber, surrounded by warning systems that were now broadcasting urgent messages to every inhabited world in the galaxy. They had accomplished the impossible, but the cost was yet to be determined. "Did we win?" Princess Lyra asked, her voice small in the vast chamber. "We bought time," Marcus replied. "The real victory will come when our people learn to work together the way we did. When the Vulpine Consortium and the Terran Federation realize that our differences make us stronger, not weaker." As they began the long journey back to the surface, both of them knew that their partnership had become something larger than either of their species had thought possible. They had proven that cooperation based on mutual respect and shared values could achieve what superior technology and individual strength could not. The warning signals reached the Vulpine homeworld first, where Emperor Aldrich received reports of his daughter's survival with amazement and growing pride. The research she had been forbidden to pursue had saved not just her life, but potentially the entire galaxy. On Earth, the Terran High Command analyzed the data transmissions with growing alarm and admiration. Captain Marcus Chen had exceeded his mission parameters in ways that redefined what it meant to be human in a galaxy full of supposedly superior species. When the rescue ships finally arrived at Xerion Prime, they found Marcus and Princess Lyra waiting beside his scout vessel, which had been repaired using a combination of human ingenuity and Vulpine technology. They were no longer rescuer and rescued or superior and inferior species. They were partners who had faced the impossible and emerged stronger for it. The alliance that formed between humanity and the Vulpine Consortium in the months that followed would become the foundation for a galactic defense network unlike anything the universe had seen. Other species joined them, each bringing their own strengths to a cooperation based not on dominance or submission, but on the understanding that diversity was the greatest weapon against those who sought to destroy all sentient life. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Marcus and Princess Lyra had discovered in the crystal maze of Xerion Prime. When faced with impossible odds, the strongest response wasn't individual heroism or technological superiority. It was the willingness to carry each other, to share burdens and strengths, and to never abandon hope no matter how dark the situation became. That was the most human thing of all, and in learning it, the galaxy had found a way to survive what was coming next.